What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Today I'll be going over 5 running backs you should be trading for in Dynasty leagues. And just like with the wide receiver video, if you don't play Dynasty, these are just 5 receivers that I think will increase in value going forward over the next few years. Also remember, you can get 15% off any package on our website right now through the end of April, promo code FFA when signing up. So, with that, let's talk about some running backs. And again, just like with last time, this is not just the 5 best running backs in Dynasty. I tried to go through a bunch of different tiers. So we've got like a top 5 option, someone in that 15 to 20 range, 30s, up until like 70s. Okay, so we're going through every range running back. So if you're looking to trade for an elite player, running back 2, running back 3, running back 4, anyone would pretty much have you covered with this one. So first one we're going to have up is Cam Akers, and he should be viewed as like a top, we'll say 7 to 8 running back in Dynasty, especially after the Matthew Stafford trade. If you didn't hear, somehow Stafford gets traded to the Rams, and so I would say in most Dynasty leagues, you're looking at McCaffrey, Barkley, Jonathan Taylor, Dalvin Cook. That should be like the top 4. I'm not saying necessarily in that order, but those 4 are pretty much locked into the top 4. After that, for the next like 5 or 6 running backs, you can kind of order it how you want, but in general, it's the trio of rookies last season of Swift, Dobbins, and Akers, and then it's that trio of not necessarily like I feel like it's Zeke, Kamara, and Henry, right? Like this trio is, it probably shouldn't be in that top 4, but is just outside of it. You can still pretty clearly say these guys are running back ones. Henry really only not in the top 4 because I guess getting up there a little bit in age when you think about in Dynasty, like he just doesn't have the same amount of years left as Jonathan Taylor, and so you'd prefer Jonathan Taylor. But the one that I would most want to trade for amongst those like 6 that I just talked about in that second tier is Cam Akers. Again, I don't want to understate how much of an upgrade Stafford is over Jared Goff. Jared Goff is not very good, and Stafford is still an elite quarterback. He's one that for sure does come with some elevated risk of suffering an injury, and given their offensive line struggles, that is a concern of mine. But while everyone's healthy, this is going to be a very, very scary offense, and we saw to close last season that they are willing to feature Akers. That was kind of our concerns going into the year was, okay, they've got Malcolm Brown, they've got Henderson, they've got Akers. If they feature, and we said they were only really going to feature Henderson or Akers, Brown was never going to be featured. But if they pick one of these guys to just feature in the offense, they're going to be fantastic. The question was, 1, will they do that? And 2, which one's it going to be? Obviously, the lean was Akers, and that's why he was going earlier in drafts. But we really didn't know for sure if they were willing to do that. And for most of the season, it seemed like the answer was no. Until the second half of the season. Starting in week 13, Akers averages 22 carries per game. That is an insane workload. Was only given a little over 2 targets per game. I think it was like 2 1/3. But that's an area he can absolutely grow in, especially with Stafford coming in. Stafford historically has targeted running backs at a pretty high rate. And just think about the scoring upside if they choose to continue featuring Akers, which it seems like they would. I mean, he was very, very good down the stretch. I don't know why they would go away from that. And so if they keep doing that, I mean, Henderson and Brown accounted for 48 red zone carries this last season. If even half of those goes over to Akers, he moves from, the 17th most carries in the red zone all the way to top 5, 5th place. It's the same for goal line carries, not just inside the 20. So both Brown and Henderson combined for 16 carries inside the 5. Shift half of those over to Akers, he's up to 7th among all running backs. And again, that's assuming half. I mean, you look at to close last season, they didn't even use Brown and Henderson. They were just like, oh, Akers, you're just going to get an insane workload, and we're just not going to use these other 2. It could be, 75% of what Henderson and Brown had. And so he has the potential to be, in the top 3 or even first in touchdowns this next season. I'm not predicting he's going to be first, but he has the upside to be first, and he could easily be in top 5. And if he's going to keep getting, 20-plus carries, top 5 in touchdowns among running backs, it's a lot of upside. And he's going to be turning 22 this year. I mean, you could get elite production for the next 5 to 6 seasons. So if you're looking to trade for an elite running back 1, I would be looking at Akers over all those names that I mentioned before. If you want a different name for an elite running back, but not, a top 10 option, how about Austin Ekeler? He will be 26 all season, and he's signed through 2023. And while the Chargers don't need to honor the contract all the way through, like he's a running back, so with a lot of quarterbacks, we see their deals being fully guaranteed. And so it's like, all right, he signed through this year. I mean, he's probably going to play with them through that year unless he turns out to be horrible. With a running back, I mean, they can cut, Ekeler, and it's not like a huge deal to them, right? And so I look at this and I say, well, that's a concern, but the money in the contract isn't like egregiously high, and he fits their offense really well, and he doesn't seem like a running back that's just going to fall off a cliff. Like if he was just an early down grinder that couldn't catch, and he loses a lot of his speed, he's just not as good anymore, well, then maybe they end up cutting him. But he's so good in the receiving game that even if he sees a little bit of a drop-off in what he can produce on the ground, he's going to be so good in the receiving aspect of the game, where we care about most in fantasy, that they're very likely still going to honor the contract for through 2023. So then 2024 hits, he's going to be 29. Then I have a little bit concerns about his future, because I don't know if they're going to re-sign him. I don't know how good he'll be there. But we should expect running back 1 production for the next 2 to 3 seasons. And while that might not seem like a ton, it's like, oh, really? Only like 2 to 3 years? It's not like you can realistically trust most running backs beyond that range. I mean, I mentioned Jonathan Taylor before. Yeah, obviously everyone wants Jonathan Taylor in fantasy. Everyone wants Christian McCaffrey in fantasy. But there are only so many running backs where you can say, yeah, they're going to be elite for a long time. And this is why Ekeler's not going to cost you an early first-round pick. He's probably going to be valued in that 15 to 25 range. I don't know exactly where he's going to go in Dynasty startups. It probably changes in every single startup with a little bit different scoring formats, different players in there. But in general, he's going to be like a low-end running back 2 when you're looking at Dynasty. And that's really, really nice if you're just assured solid production. But we do know that, at least in the short term, he is the Chargers' starting running back. He'll be exceptionally valuable in PPR formats, which is what the vast majority of people use in Dynasty. So with a secured role for these next 2 to 3 seasons, we know the offense also is going to be really good over that time. Like, this isn't an offense where, like, who's their quarterback going to be? Do they have any other weapons? Yeah, they have other weapons that are going to be on the team for the next 2 seasons. I think their quarterback situation is pretty much solved. They should have solid quarterback play. And so there's no real big concerns. And maybe the person that has Ekeler is frustrated over the injuries this past season, and maybe you can get him for a little bit cheaper. But I think Ekeler is a really, really nice high-end target if you're not going to the like top 10 options, because those are going to cost you a lot. If you're looking for even cheaper than Austin Ekeler, how about Damien Harris? He didn't play as much as we wanted him to in his rookie season, but he was the clear lead back this past year, always playing ahead of Sony when he was healthy. His issue this last season was the health. He started the season on the IR because of the fractured finger, and then he comes back, and then he suffers an ankle injury, a chest injury. There was just so many injuries keeping him off the field, but when he was playing, he was doing really well. But these injuries, unfortunately, meant across 10 games, he only had 137 carries. But if we look at this offense moving forward, Sony is only signed through the end of this season, and I would honestly be shocked if they brought him back. And as of recording this, James White is a free agent, and even if he returns, he's already 29. So as long as they don't spend a ton of draft capital on a new running back, which I really just don't see happening. I mean, they've already spent a lot of capital on Sony, on Harris. Didn't work out with Sony. Harris, you can honestly say to this point, hasn't worked out, but You just can't keep spending high draft picks on a running back, especially when that's not the position that you need to change. They need upgrades at quarterback. They need upgrades at receiver. They need upgrades on the defense. It kind of depends on who comes back from the opt-outs, but they need upgrades in so many other areas that they're not going to spend, at least they'd be really dumb to spend an early pick on a running back. So if that doesn't happen, and he's still working at a Sony, and there's the chance that James White doesn't come back, I mean, we should assume that Harris is the lead back for about the next 2 seasons, at least on an offense that basically has nowhere to go but up. I talked about all those upgrades that need to happen. It's because the team was horrible this season. Probably the worst skill positions of any team in the league. And I guess you could say after Edelman got hurt, like maybe there's a team that's worse when everyone was healthy, but when Edelman went down and when you were having these rotations at running backs and you were relying on the garbage they had at receiver, outside of my boy Jacoby Myers, but they had nothing. And so there's really nowhere to go but up. They could bring in a new quarterback that isn't going to steal every single goal line carry, that is actually going to target the running back position. And so when you've got Harris, a talented running back, should get the goal line. They should have more touchdowns overall. More share of the touchdowns should go to running backs. There's a lot of upside. So if you're looking for more of that like mid-range option for running back, I think that Damien Harris is a really nice guy to go after for that upside. If he's too expensive, can I interest you in our boy Zack Moss? Moss did not have the season and not the ending to the season that we would have liked, but there are still a lot of things to be encouraged about. One's his goal line usage. Despite playing 4 fewer regular season games, he had 8 more carries inside the red zone, 7 more carries inside the 10, 3 more carries inside the 5 than Devin Singletary. And the Bills are obviously a really good offense, and they should be over the next 2 seasons. So if you're getting a good share of the carries inside the 20, 10, 5-yard line, your scoring upside's going to be really high. So being their goal line back is really great, but the biggest positive is that they hate Devin Singletary. I mean, they just refuse to give him a sizable workload. They were using Yeldon over him in a must-win playoff game when Moss was done for the season. I mean, Singletary is not a threat to the long-term value of Zack Moss. But I'm sure a lot of Dynasty owners do think that he is, and so that's going to decrease the value of Moss, especially since he ended the season injured. We always talk about that. Ending of the season holds a lot of weight in people's mind. Had he gone out there in their playoff loss and had like 5 receptions, 10 carries for 50 yards, people would have been like, ooh, maybe this is what we can see from Moss this next season. He doesn't. He ends the season injured. The running backs don't really do all that much in the game, and so people are going to keep that in their mind instead. The one possibility that can hurt his value is the draft and free agency. So I talked about how the Patriots seem pretty unlikely to bring someone in to compete with Damien Harris. It's definitely possible that the Bills bring someone in free agency or in the draft that is going to threaten the workload of Moss. So understand that. Understand that you're taking a risk here. If you can get him for cheap and say, okay, I'm going to take the risk, and if they don't bring anyone in, we should probably assume that Moss is going to be the guy next season. But they could go out in free agency and bring someone in. Someone maybe like the guy I'm going to talk about in a second. They could go out and get Aaron Jones in free agency. They could get a number of free agents or also spend a pick in the draft. And that would honestly just tank the value of Zack Moss. So if you're willing to take that risk, here's a guy you can go after. If he's really expensive, don't do it. But if he's, really, really cheap, you're like, oh, that's all you're asking for Moss, I think it's worth the risk because it's a really, really good offense. And if he can take over that role in the red zone on early downs, he's good enough as a receiver to take over that role as well. They choose to feature him, ton of upside. So it's a risk, but you could be rewarded for it. Final running back we'll go over is definitely the cheapest. It'll be cheaper than all these guys we talked about. And he comes with a lot of upside. And that's Gus Edwards. Now, doesn't seem like a name. You're like, Gus Edwards, why would I trade for him in a Dynasty league? Well, he's going to be 26 when the season starts, so not like young, but he definitely still has a few years left. And he's averaged, at least 5 yards per carry in each of his first 3 seasons. And I understand that, he was on the Ravens, right? He was so efficient because he was on an exceptional rushing offense. But, averaging 5.2 yards per carry for your career, I don't care what team you're on. If you're getting a workload, and he was getting a sizable workload, not like, he wasn't out there like Derrick Henry, but he was getting, more than 50 carries. Like if someone's averaging 5 yards per carry on 25 carries, like, okay, well, he probably just had one long run. Gus Edwards wasn't breaking off, 90-yard rushing touchdowns, and he wasn't getting, 25 carries. He was getting a good chunk of carries, and he was very consistently a good running back. And so is there a team out there in free agency that's like, listen, we don't want to spend a bunch on a position that doesn't matter all that much, but we need an upgrade? And they look at Gus Edwards and they say 5 yards per carry at least in every single season. He's still 26, so he should still be producing, not at his peak, but a little bit down from the peak. And he's not going to cost us all that much. He looked really, really good. I know the eye test is dumb, but like we wanted Dobbins to just take over the full workload last season. And it never really happened, honestly, because Gus was performing pretty well. And so does a team that really needs a running back go out and say, okay, I'm going to bring in Gus Edwards? It's possible, and I would say that his value kind of depends on that, because let's say he stays in the Ravens, he's going to stay efficient, but we got to assume this next season Dobbins going to take over a little bit more of a workload, and you're just not going to be able to trust Gus Edwards. You're going to be like, kind of wish I didn't trade for him. But if he goes to the Falcons, the 49ers, the Texans, even the Bills that we just talked about, and they're willing to give him a good contract and not really draft a running back in free agency, and it looks like he's going to be the guy, he could be really useful, especially if they're willing to give him more of a workload than Baltimore gave him and maybe use him more in the receiving game than Baltimore did. I just think there's a lot of upside there. So again, I think the Moss and the Gus Edwards one, those two are like, I don't have much to spend on running back. Who's got a chance? I really think Gus does, because, think about the free agency market. Like, if someone's willing to give him a good deal, do you think the Ravens are going to sit there and be like, oh, we're going to give you more? Do the Ravens really want to go out there and spend a ton on Gus Edwards? Probably not. And so if a team is willing to give him a good contract, that'll take him away, put him into a better situation, and that contract will indicate to us that we can trust them, because teams speak in the draft and in free agency. They speak with their money. Don't listen to what coaches are saying in the offseason. Look at who they gave a ton of money to and who they spent high draft capital on. That's who they want to use. And so if he moves in free agency, I think it could be really, really nice in Dynasty. So those are 5 running backs that I would be trading for in Dynasty leagues. If you want to see more Dynasty content, then just let me know and I'll do more videos like this. And remember the discount. Promo code FFA on any package on the website now before May 1st, so through the end of April, and you get 15% off. That, my friends, is the end of this one. Hope you all did enjoy. If you did, then how about hitting that like button, and how about subscribing to the channel if you're new? But thanks for watching.